The House comes to questions for oral answer. Question number 1, in the name of Mark Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. What progress is the government making in building a more competitive and productive economy?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, good progress. The government has 4 priorities: responsibly managing the government's finances, building a more productive economy, delivering better public services and rebuilding Christchurch, and we're making progress on all of these. 200,000 more people are in work now than 3 years ago, and a further 170,000 jobs are expected by 2020. The average wage is forecast to rise to $63,000 a year, and we're on track for moderate growth of 2 to 3% over the next 4 years.
Supplementary question.
Order. Supplementary question, Mark Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, given the outlook for continuing growth, what steps is the government taking to lock in these gains through investment in infrastructure, education and better social outcomes?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, as set out in Budget 2016, we're focusing on increasing investment in infrastructure and getting better results for public spending. So, for instance, a $700 million investment in science, skills and regional development, $2.1 billion package for public infrastructure, including the complete rebuild of IRD's tax systems, $650 million for social investment to support vulnerable New Zealanders, and in Budget 2016 there was a $2.2 billion health package. It's the results that this spending will achieve, however, that will be beneficial to New Zealand households.
Supplementary question, Mark Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you. To the Minister, what are some of the consequences of lower interest rates for households and the economy?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the track for New Zealand interest rates reflects what's happening with interest rates around the world, and that is reaching all-time lows, and in some countries negative interest rates for the first time in living memory. That, in part, is what is driving up asset prices in stock markets and exchange rates and land and house prices. However, lower interest rates reduce the cost of borrowing, and that means that households have lifted their debt levels because they can service larger debt at about the same proportion of interest payments in their income.
I just need to inform Mr Seymour that with enthusiasm he used his complete allocation of questions yesterday. Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Happy news, Mr Speaker.
Order. Order. If the member wishes to seek leave, he's entitled to do so.
Meanwhile, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
What progress is the government making towards its target of exports as a percentage of GDP rising from 30 to 40%? And if he doesn't have the exact figure, can he indicate if it's progress or regress?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the government's making good progress towards its 2025 target. Of course, as that member will be aware, the impact of the Christchurch earthquake and the fact that thousands of New Zealanders are staying home instead of leaving means that there has been significant commitment of capital and labour resource to domestic growth. As we continue on the back of this success, get the houses built and Christchurch finished, those resources will be available to divert to the export sector.
Order. Point of order, the Honourable Jerry Brown.
Mr Speaker, although we can't always be certain of the quality of the question, the government would be prepared to give one of its supplementaries to Mr Seymour so that he might be able to ask his question.
Then on that basis I will certainly accept a supplementary from Mr Seymour, but in the future The arrangements need to be a little more formal, otherwise it's very difficult for me to keep an accurate score here. Further supplementaries? Oh, supplementary question. David Seymour.
Has the government's fiscal discipline been strong enough to enable tax cuts next year in election year?
The Honourable Bill English. Order.
Well, Mr Speaker, that's yet to be seen. What we do know is that fiscal discipline of itself isn't sufficient to ensure that New Zealanders get the best results from their public services. We need to actually focus on delivering effective services to people who really need them. And what we found is that the more we do that, the less need there is in the longer run for government services, and that means more opportunities for lower taxes.
Point of order, the Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr Speaker, I've been reflecting upon the exchange that's just taken place because my colleague to the left wanted to ask a supplementary question. While I accept the principle that's been established for a long time of primary questions being allocated on a proportionate basis around the House, so I do wonder whether it's time for you to give fresh consideration to the allocation of supplementary questions. My colleague to my left is extremely enthusiastic. I'm not sure that he should be punished for his enthusiasm. And I wonder, sir, whether it's time to take a more flexible approach to the granting of supplementary questions based on a member's interests rather than the size of the party they represent.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Order. I will hear from Chris Hipkins.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, ultimately the Business Committee makes an indicative allocation of supplementary questions, but the discretion, of course, always rests with the Speaker in making a final decision on how supplementaries should be allocated, and has, of course, and the Speakers have traditionally allocated supplementaries on the basis of proportionality in the House, which is what the indicative allocation of supplementaries is based upon. If members were to suggest that supplementaries be allocated based on quality, I would suggest that we get a lot more supplementaries over this side of the House than over that side of the House.
Order. No, I don't. I will hear from Ron now. Order.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'd rise to lend some support to the views of the very experienced Honourable Peter Dunn, who stands as one of the longest-serving ministers in New Zealand's Parliament. And I think if I could just add something to maybe take into account what Chris Hipkins has said from Labor, if you could come up with a formula that lends credence to the level of interest a particular party has in a particular issue, plus balanced by their numbers in the House, we'd wholeheartedly, I think, consider that.
I thank all members for their contribution. The Honourable Peter Dunn has asked me to give consideration to the matter. I will do so, but I do remind members that the allocation of questions, both primary and supplementary, is discussed at length at the start of each parliament. It has, by tradition, for many years now been allocated on a proportional basis. I note that members to my left, to my right, often don't use their full allocation. Members to the left certainly do. The arrangements by which some of the smaller parties don't get perhaps what they see as a fair share is often done then by informal arrangements between a major party and a coalition party. What I do need is that arrangement to be relatively formal so that I can keep score. But in regards to Mr Dunn's issue, I will give it further consideration. I may raise it as an item for discussion at Business Committee next week. Further supplementaries? Supplementary question, Grant Robertson. Fresh point of order, David Seymour.
I just asked you to confer with the officials. I think I actually do have 2 remaining this week, quite apart from anything else, and thank you for the freebie. Thank you.
I will check that out again, but not according to the records that have been presented to me. The member's entitled to 2. He has an additional 3 that are granted by the National Party to Mr Seymour. That makes a total of 5. And as I pointed out with great enthusiasm, he asked 5 supplementary questions yesterday. Further supplementaries? Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does he agree with the Minister for Economic Development that growth in per capita GDP last year was, quote, about 0.5%? And if so, isn't Hamish Rutherford correct that New Zealand's economic growth is, quote, driven almost exclusively by rising population?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I consult with a range of economists and statisticians, and and Hamish Rutherford, who I understand fits neither of those descriptions, but he is a journalist. Mr Speaker, no, he's not correct. But I do notice the opposition and, to some extent, commentators always say that whatever's causing growth at the moment is not valid growth, and if you took it out, growth would be zero. Well, that's true. If you take away everything that's growing, there's no growth. But in fact, for the 21-year-old Māori and Polynesian males who've just got apprenticeships in Auckland, and will get more because we are announcing the Tamaki Regeneration Project, they think it's real growth.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Mark Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What international reports has he received on the performance of the New Zealand economy?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, there was a recent article in the Australian Financial Review which said, in one of the rare occasions that they report New Zealand, quote, the New Zealand government has, quote, achieved an increasingly rare feat in any advanced economy. That includes returning a budget to surplus while managing better growth along with substantive social, economic and taxation reform. That's not a bad verdict from the Aussies.
Question number 2,